A deep, urgent growl rippled through the coastal fog. Ranger never growled like that. Caleb Morgan froze, every instinct sharpened. His German shepherd wasn't chasing a stray deer or reacting to thunder. This was different. This was fear, real fear. Then Ranger bolted toward the cliffside fence, claws tearing into the wet earth. Caleb sprinted after him, his flashlight trembling in his grip as the beam sliced through the swirling mist. That's when he saw it. Someone crumpled against the fence posts. A young woman, barely conscious. Rain pooled beneath her, but the darker streak running down her side wasn't rain at all, blood. Fresh and warm in the cold dawn air. She hadn't wandered there by accident. Someone had driven her to the edge, and whoever it was might still be close. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The Pacific storm hammered the Oregon coastline with rain slicing sideways and waves exploding against the black cliffs. Caleb Morgan stood alone in his weather-beaten cabin, a structure of old cedar and salt-stained window panes, perched dangerously close to the edge. Caleb, now in his mid-30s, carried the rugged build of a man who had worked with his hands most of his life. Broad shoulders, sinewed forearms, and a posture always slightly braced, as if expecting impact. His face was sharply lined, not with age but with wear, a long, thin scar near his right eyebrow from a roadside blast in Helmand, a jaw at an habitual caution, and eyes that should have belonged to someone 20 years older, gray-green and constantly scanning, even in moments of supposed rest. Those eyes softened only for Ranger. Ranger, his 5-year-old German shepherd, was a powerful, disciplined dog with deep black and tan fur and alert amber eyes that track every shift of Caleb's breath. Unlike most service animals, Ranger was not gentle by nature. He had been intense, high drive, almost too sharp for standard assignments, until a Marine Corps dog handler, noticing a strange mirroring between dog and veteran, placed him with Caleb. The two lived by quiet rhythms, slow mornings with coffee and the ocean's roar, midday walks along the cliff trail, and long evenings where Ranger would rest his head on Caleb's knee whenever his breathing hitched or his stare drifted too far into the past. Tonight, though, routine disintegrated. The storm had cut the power twice already. The third time the cabin sank into darkness for good. Caleb tried the landline. Dead. He wasn't surprised. A fallen spruce had snapped the wires last winter. He grabbed a flashlight, but the low battery warning blinked, a quiet insult to an already violent night. He muttered something under his breath and moved toward the cupboard for a candle, but behind him Ranger stiffened. Not subtly, not like responding to thunder or wind, but with a sudden tension that shot through his whole frame. The dog's ears pricked, his chest expanded, and then came the bark. It was not aggressive, not territorial. It was frantic, urgent. Caleb's heart clenched. Ranger only barked like that when something was terribly wrong, when the veteran's own pulse would normally spike before a panic flashback. "What is it, boy?" Caleb whispered, but even before the question escaped, Ranger bolted toward the door. Caleb cursed, grabbed his rain jacket, and swung the door open, immediately shoved back by wind and horizontal rain that hit like shrapnel. Ranger darted into the storm, a streak of black and tan swallowed instantly by the night. Caleb followed, gripping the flashlight as the beam broke into useless fragments. The ground was slick mud over stone. Every step slid dangerously close to the cliff's drop-off. The fence line shook in the wind, creaking like old bones. Caleb's pulse quickened, a low, familiar burn into his chest, the first warning of a climbing panic attack. But Ranger's bark cut through the storm again, and Caleb anchored himself with that sound. He forced himself forward. The flashlight flickered, washed pale across the fence, and caught a shape collapsed against it. For a split second, Caleb thought it was driftwood. Then the beam steadied and the truth sharpened. A woman lay curled on her side, drenched in rain and shaking uncontrollably. She looked young, late 20s maybe. Her hair, a dark chestnut braided loosely down her back, was plastered across a face drained of color. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the stormlight, with a scattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose. She wore a thin windbreaker far too light for the coastal storm, soaked jeans, and shoes so saturated with water they squelched when Caleb touched them. She did not look like a hiker. She did not look like someone who belonged anywhere near the storm. Ranger paced beside her, whining now, not in fear but in alarm, nudging her shoulder as if urging her to breathe. Caleb dropped to his knees, ignoring the sting of rain on his back. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching. A faint pulse fluttered, slow and thready. Relief hit him, then vanished when his hand moved and felt the warmth spreading through her jacket. Blood. Rain diluted the red but could not hide it. Caleb's mind shifted, an old training instinct snapping awake like a switchblade. He scanned the darkness behind them, edges of cliff and forest merging into one indistinguishable threat. She hadn't just collapsed. She hadn't been caught by weather. Someone had hurt her. Someone might still be nearby. He gathered her gently into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp with shock, her skin cold enough to bite through his jacket. She stirred faintly, lips parting in a whisper he couldn't hear over the storm. Caleb looked down at her, at the bruise along her jaw, at the torn fabric at her side, and felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with PTSD. "I've got you," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. He turned toward the cabin, Ranger circling protectively at his heels. Lightning split the sky behind them in a jagged line. Caleb didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew. This woman hadn't stumbled onto his land by accident. She wasn't just injured, she was being hunted. The cabin smelled of salt water, wet cedar, and the metallic tang of blood as Caleb Morgan moved swiftly through the room, every motion disciplined from years spent repairing wounds in places where no doctor ever came. Caleb laid the unconscious woman on his old leather couch, the one with stitching he had mended by hand during long, sleepless nights. His rugged face, angular and shadowed by faint stubble, remained calm, though a hard knot of war-born instinct tightened behind his ribs. He removed her soaked windbreaker with careful precision, slicing open the inner lining with the small field knife he kept on him at all times. Beneath her clothes he found the gash along her side, a deep, jagged tear, not clean like a knife wound, but raw and torn, as if something metal had raked across her ribs. Barbed wire, perhaps, or a sharp outcrop of rock she had slammed into while running for her life. Her skin was alabaster white under the stormlight, filtering through the curtains mottled with cold and bruising. Her breathing was shallow, labored. She looked even younger now that she was still late 20s, Caleb guessed, but her face had the drawn, hollow look of someone who had been running far longer than her body could bear. Ranger paced in a tight circle nearby, tail stiff, ears pinned forward, the tension in his black and tan frame unmistakable. The dog's amber eyes flicked from Caleb to the woman and back, as if demanding an explanation. "I know, boy," Caleb murmured, dipping a cloth into warm water and gently cleaning the wound. "I know." It had been years since Caleb last patched someone up outside of a battlefield, but the muscle memory was still there, steady hands, logical steps, and the numb, emotional distance that slid over him like old armor. He stitched the wound in quick, neat passes, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. His movements were mechanical until his fingers brushed something harder beneath her inner jacket lining, a lump, something that didn't belong. He frowned, peeling back the fabric. Inside was a small black device no bigger than a thumb, sleek edges, matte casing, a tiny LED blinking a soft, steady green. Not a phone, not a tracker for hiking, a professional piece of hardware. Caleb's hand tightened. The air in the cabin, warm from the wood stove, suddenly felt colder than the storm outside. Someone was tracking her, actively. He wrapped the device in aluminum foil, then shoved it into a waterproof pouch and buried it inside a metal toolbox beneath his workbench. Enough to buy a little time, though he knew it wouldn't fool a determined team for long. When he returned to her side, Ranger was sitting alert beside the woman, as if guarding her. Caleb wiped sweat and rain from his brow, his gray-green eyes lingering on her face. She stirred. A soft sound escaped her lips. Then her eyelids fluttered, revealing hazel eyes clouded with pain and fear. For a moment she stared up at Caleb as if unsure whether he was real. "You're safe," he said, though the words felt heavy on his tongue. Safe was never certain, not in storms like this, not with trackers blinking in the night. Her voice was a rasp. "Water." He lifted a cup to her lips. She drank greedily, then coughed, clutching her side. Caleb steadied her without flinching. "What's your name?" he asked. Her gaze drifted, unfocused at first, then sharpened slowly. "Emily," she whispered. "Emily Clark." Her voice trembled, not fragile, but exhausted. She wasn't the naive type. Her eyes carried the wary intelligence of someone used to watching people closely, someone who had learned not to trust easily. "I'm a journalist," she added, barely audible. "Investigative." Caleb felt a shift in his chest. Not sympathy exactly, but an instinctive understanding. He had known that type before. People who ran toward danger to expose truth others wanted buried. People who got killed for it. "What happened to you, Emily?" She flinched at the question. Ranger leaned forward, sniffing her hand, and something in her posture eased slightly, as though the dog's presence grounded her. She swallowed. "Heliodin Biotech," she said, the name cracking like lightning in the dim cabin. Caleb frowned. He'd heard of the corporation, vaguely, pharmaceutical giant, powerful, clean public image. But corporations that big rarely stayed clean. Emily continued, her voice trembling but determined. "I was investigating their field trials in South America. They tested a new neurological drug on impoverished communities. Without consent. People got sick. Some died." She paused, eyes glinting with rage beneath the fear. A data analyst inside the company, Daniel Brooks, leaked internal footage to me. He wanted the truth out. She clenched the blanket Caleb had placed over her. They killed him for it. Caleb felt something dark coil in his stomach. He'd seen men killed for far less. "I have the video on me," Emily said. "Proof of everything, proof of who ordered the hit." Her breath hitched. "The Sentinel Group." Caleb stiffened. The name echoed down old corridors in his mind, places where rumors traveled faster than bullets. Sentinel, a private paramilitary contractor known among soldiers for invisible work, the kind no one admitted existed. They operated outside borders, outside laws, ghosts with guns. "Their commander, Elliot Kellen," Emily whispered. "He's the one hunting me." The name struck Caleb harder than he expected. Elliot Kellen was infamous among certain circles, not for bravery, but for cold efficiency. A man who had once been in Army Special Operations before a dishonorable discharge for an operation gone wrong, something about civilian casualties buried beneath layers of redacted reports. Afterward, Kellen resurfaced in the private sector, building a reputation as someone who delivered results without complications, which usually meant without witnesses. Caleb exhaled slowly. Everything clicked into place. The wound, the tracker, the fear. The storm wasn't the danger. The danger was coming for her. Emily's voice shook. "I didn't mean to come here. I was trying to reach the coastal highway when they caught up to me. I ran. I slipped. I think I hit metal fencing. I just kept running until—" Her eyes locked onto his. "Until your dog found me." Ranger, hearing his unspoken praise, nudged her hand. She smiled weakly, a brief human thing amid terror. Caleb stood, shoulders tense with decision. He wasn't the man who rescued people, not anymore. He had tried once and failed someone who mattered far too much. The memory twisted in his chest like shrapnel. But Emily wasn't a soldier, wasn't someone who chose violence. She was someone who had chosen truth and paid for it. He could not send her back outside, and the video she carried, if it was real, it could bury entire corporations, could save people, could expose the ghosts. He looked at Ranger. The dog held his gaze, steadfast, expectant. Caleb inhaled deeply. "You're not going back out there," he said finally. "Not tonight. Not until I get that video out of here." Emily blinked in disbelief. "Why would you help me?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "Because someone has to." The storm roared outside, shaking the cabin frame. Somewhere in that darkness, the men hunting her were closing in, quiet, methodical, merciless. Caleb knew their kind better than most. He turned the deadbolt on his door, then checked the ammo in his handgun. 2 tasks crystallized in his mind, sharp as a blade's edge. Keep Emily alive. Get the evidence off the coast. No matter the storm, no matter the men coming for them, war had returned to him, and it wasn't leaving. Rain hammered the Oregon coastline like a relentless drum, each strike on the roof sharp enough to echo through the wooden ribs of the cabin. Caleb Morgan stood near the window, the dim glow of an oil lamp casting long shadows across his angular features. His gray-green eyes, always alert, tracked the storm as if reading a battlefield beyond the cliffs. The faint stubble along his jaw, the thin scar over his right brow, and the hard lines carved from years of conflict made him look carved from the same weathered cedar that formed the cabin walls. Behind him, Ranger paced restlessly. The 5-year-old German shepherd moved with coiled precision, his black and tan coat bristling whenever the thunder shook the windows. His amber eyes were locked on the door, posture tense, as though the storm itself carried an intruder on its back. Emily Clark lay wrapped in blankets on the couch, her hazel eyes drifting between exhaustion and sharp focus. The dim light softened the bruising on her face, but nothing could hide the hardened determination that flickered behind her fear. Her chestnut hair, still damp, framed her pale face, giving her an almost ghostly appearance. Caleb reached into a drawer and pulled out an old Iridium satellite phone. The dark metal casing was scratched, worn from years of sand, smoke, and hands gripping it during missions, where communication failures meant death. Tonight, the device felt like a lifeline, thin, fragile, but still a lifeline. He dialed a number from memory. The line crackled before a voice answered, a low, steady voice shaped by caffeine, insomnia, and too many classified missions. "Mark Henson," the man said. "Mark, it's Caleb." A pause, then a quiet, almost relieved exhale. "Damn. Thought you fell off the map years ago. What's going on?" Mark Henson had once been the calm center of chaos in Caleb's unit. A SIGINT operator with a wiry frame, perpetually tired blue eyes, and sandy blonde hair shaved close on the sides. Mark had always looked slightly fragile, like a man who hadn't eaten or slept enough, yet he carried an aura of relentless sharpness, quick thinking, sarcastic, but fiercely loyal. Years of intercepting enemy signals had made him paranoid, brilliant, and allergic to surprises. Caleb kept his voice low. "I need a secure server. I'm sending something big." Mark didn't waste time with questions. "Encrypted channel open. Upload whenever you're ready." Caleb connected the device Emily had given him, the small encrypted drive that held the evidence capable of destroying Heliodyne Biotech and the Sentinel Group. A loading bar appeared. Uploading 2%, 7%. But before it reached 10%, Ranger's behavior shifted. The dog froze mid-pace, ears snapping forward. A guttural rumble built in his chest. Not the anxious bark from earlier. This was the low, primal warning he only used when danger stood on 2 legs. Caleb's stomach tightened. He moved to the window and peered through the rain. The muddy road leading up from the main trail glistened under sweeping headlights. A sleek black SUV, too clean, too polished for the rugged coast, rolled slowly toward the cabin. Ranger pressed against Caleb's leg, muscles locked. Emily weakly pushed herself upright. "They found us." Caleb shut the satellite phone and slipped it into his jacket. The upload froze at 9%. No time. The SUV stopped. Rain sprayed off the tires. The engine hummed. Smooth, mechanical, expensive. A knock sounded on the door. Not panicked, not frantic. Controlled, polite. Caleb opened the door only an inch. A man stood on the porch, shaping himself against the storm with unsettling composure. His black raincoat was crisp and tailored, beads of water rolling off the material like oil on glass. His dark hair was neatly combed back despite the wind, revealing a face carved with elegant predatory sharpness. High cheekbones, narrow nose, and lips curled in a faint, friendly smile that did not reach his eyes. Those eyes were the most disturbing part. Cold, pale blue, assessing Caleb the way one might assess a locked door they already had the key for. "Good evening," the man said softly, his voice smooth as silk and equally artificial. "My name is Elliot Kellen, Sentinel Group." Emily's entire body went rigid behind Caleb. Kellen continued, still calm despite standing in a storm violent enough to snap tree limbs. "We're searching for a colleague of ours. A young woman, dark hair, mid-20s, last seen running in this direction. We're quite concerned for her safety." His smile tightened like a wolf trying to look polite. Caleb kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen anyone." Kellen nodded slowly, as if humoring him. "You live alone, Mr. Morgan?" "Just me and my dog." Kellen's gaze flicked past Caleb, landing on Ranger. The German shepherd growled, baring teeth. Kellen didn't flinch. In fact, he almost looked pleased. "We caught 2 heat signatures on our thermal drone," Kellen said casually. "I imagine one is the dog." Caleb kept one hand on the doorframe, doing everything he could not to reveal emotion. "Storm plays tricks on sensors." Kellen murmured, clearly unconvinced. He reached into his pocket, not quickly enough to trigger Caleb's reflexes, but slowly, deliberately, and withdrew a matte black business card embossed with a silver emblem, the helmeted face of Sentinel's logo. "Call me if you see anything." He offered the card like a poisonous gift. Caleb didn't take it. Kellen simply let it fall to the porch, unbothered. "Have a safe night, Mr. Morgan." The man turned, his posture relaxed, but his steps too quiet, too measured. The SUV's taillights glowed red before disappearing into the storm. Caleb shut the door, heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. Emily looked at him, shaking. "He knows I'm here." Caleb grabbed his flashlight and strode out into the rain, checking the old landline pole where the wires sagged in the wind. His stomach dropped. The cut was clean, exact, almost surgical. This wasn't weather damage, this was a warning. When he returned to the cabin, he tried the satellite phone again. Instead of a connection, the screen flashed, "Jamming detected." He cursed under his breath. "They set up a jammer." Emily's face paled. "Then they're close." Ranger suddenly lunged toward the floorboards, barking in sharp, frantic bursts. Caleb froze. He heard it too, metal scraping against glass, the soft click of a latch, muffled steps beneath the floor. Someone was in the boathouse. Someone was coming up through the old storm hatch he had forgotten even existed. Caleb grabbed his gun. Ranger stood beside him, shoulders lowered, growl deep and unbroken. "They're not coming through the front," Caleb said. The cabin trembled as the first lock beneath the floor gave way. The second lock clicked, then the third. The Sentinel Group was already inside. Rain still hammered the Oregon cliffs as Caleb Morgan dragged the unconscious intruder across the basement floor, his boots scraping against the damp concrete. The young man, barely in his mid-20s, was built lean, with pale skin and short sandy hair plastered to his forehead. He wore black tactical gear soaked from the boathouse crawlspace, and a slim toolkit was strapped across his chest. The suppressed pistol clipped to his belt confirmed what Caleb already suspected. This wasn't a scout. He was a technician, a specialist sent to open locks, disable systems, and clear the way for killers. Even unconscious, his narrow face was twisted with the cold discipline of someone trained to obey without conscience. Caleb bound his wrists and ankles with industrial tape, then secured his mouth. His injured shoulder throbbed, but the anger rising in his chest pushed the pain aside. Once the intruder stirred, Caleb used every part of his training, both the measured interrogation skills of a Marine and the darker instincts forged in years of war, to break through the young man's rehearsed silence. Under pressure, trembling, the technician finally spoke of the Sentinel Group's orders. Retrieve the data. Erase the location. No survivors. The words chilled Caleb more than the storm outside. He shoved the technician into the old boathouse freezer chamber beneath the floor, slammed the heavy hatch, and locked it from the outside with a rusted steel bar. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would hold long enough. He returned to the main room where Ranger stood stiff and alert, the 5-year-old German shepherd trembling with an energy that was not fear but readiness. Emily Clark sat against the far wall, wrapped in the wool blanket, her damp chestnut hair clinging to her pale cheeks. Her hazel eyes widened when she saw the blood seeping through Caleb's shirt, but he raised a hand. "No time," he said. "Sentinel's walls are closing." He grabbed the Iridium satellite phone and the encrypted drive. "We're going up the cliff, past the interference field." Emily stared at him, horrified. "You're injured. You can barely move that arm." "I don't need both arms to save your life," he cut in, his voice steady despite the tightness in his jaw. "Or mine." Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury. The Pacific wind slammed into the cliffs, and rain lashed them sideways. Caleb pushed forward, using his good arm to steady himself on jagged stone. Ranger led the way, agile, his black and tan coat streaked with water. The climb was brutal. Rocks were slippery with moss and rain, and twice Caleb nearly lost his footing. The pain in his shoulder burned, then numbed, then burned again, but he kept going. They reached a narrow ledge halfway up the cliff, a platform of stone jutting toward the open sky. The storm thinned here, just enough for faint satellite signal to pierce through the interference. Caleb dropped to one knee, breathing hard, shielding the phone with his body. The screen flickered, one signal bar, then two. Upload started. Ranger pressed close to him, ears forward, his body tense. Caleb stroked the dog's wet fur with his working hand. "Just a minute longer, boy." Rain blurred the world into a gray sheet. Wind whipped across the ledge. The loading bar crawled upward. 9%, 12%, 17%. Then Ranger stiffened, lifting his head. His growl barely rose above the storm. Caleb raised his eyes just as a faint, chilling pop sliced the air. A sound nearly swallowed by the wind, but unmistakable to a Marine. Supersonic. Sniper. Ranger lunged without hesitation, slamming into Caleb's side with full weight. The bullet meant for Caleb's chest sliced through his shoulder instead, spinning him across the slick stone. His phone skittered dangerously close to the edge, but the upload jumped. 94%, 98%, 100%, complete. Across the ravine on a distant ridge, a lone shooter adjusted his rifle, unseen behind rain and shadow. He had already spoken into his comms. "Target down," and Elliot Kellen believed him. Bleeding, dizzy, Caleb clutched Ranger's fur and forced himself upright. "We're not done," he murmured through clenched teeth. "Not tonight." They staggered back down the cliffside, using the storm to conceal their movements. The cabin was no longer safe. The Sentinel group would sweep it quickly, and Emily, if she was still inside, would be slaughtered without hesitation. Caleb changed direction, guiding Ranger toward the old boathouse workshop, a decaying structure built of warped boards and rusted metal sheets. Once a repair shed for fishermen, now forgotten, smelling of salt, engine grease, and rotting timber, it would serve as a battleground. Lightning flashed as he slipped inside. Shadows twisted across the rafters. Caleb crouched behind a rusted tool bench, forcing his mind into the calm focus of combat. The pain in his shoulder kept pulling him toward darkness, but he forced himself awake, forced himself ready. Through the thick rain, he saw two silhouettes approaching, one slender but rigid with authority, Elliot Kellen, the other broader, carrying military-grade gear, a full Sentinel field operative with a blank expression and a hardened jaw, the type of man built in training fields where empathy was suffocated early. They entered the boathouse cautiously. Kellen's raincoat glistened, his pale blue eyes calculating. "Finish it quickly," he said to his subordinate. But he didn't anticipate Ranger. The dog, silent as a shadow, waited in the dark until the armed operative stepped forward. Then he lunged. Teeth sank into the man's wrist, forcing the muzzle of the gun downward as it fired into the dirt. The operative roared, staggering back. Kellen spun, firing once, the muzzle flash lighting his angular face. But Caleb had already moved, rising from behind the bench with a broken length of steel pipe in his good hand. He struck Kellen hard across the forearm, knocking the pistol loose. But Caleb's injury slowed him. Kellen's strength and precision, honed from a life of cold, calculated violence, overwhelmed him quickly. Within seconds, Caleb was driven backward, pinned against a column as Kellen pressed a recovered gun to his temple. "You should have stayed invisible," Kellen said softly. "Now you die with her." From the shadows, a shape launched. Ranger, again. The German shepherd slammed into Kellen with ferocious force, jaws locking around the gun arm. Kellen screamed as teeth tore flesh. He kicked once, twice, a brutal arc of force. Ranger hit the wall with a sickening thud and collapsed, legs trembling. Something inside Caleb snapped. Not madness, clarity, the clarity of a man choosing who he refused to become. He redirected Kellen's arm, twisted, and heard the sharp crack of bone snapping under torque. Kellen fell to his knees, gasping. Caleb seized the fallen pistol with shaking fingers and aimed it between the man's eyes. Rain pounded the roof. Thunder growled. Kellen looked up, defiant even in pain. "Do it," he hissed. Caleb's hand trembled. The ghosts from war crowded his vision. Darkness tried to speak through him. Then a voice shattered it. "Caleb, stop!" Emily stood at the doorway, drenched, shivering, but alive. Her hazel eyes wide with fear, not of Kellen, but of what Caleb might become. "If you shoot him the way he shot Daniel," she said, voice cracking, "then what separates you from him?" Her words found their mark. Caleb's breathing slowed, his grip loosened. The storm inside him broke, not with violence, but with release. He lowered the gun. Kellen was still alive, but now he would face the law, the one thing he'd spent his life evading. And for the first time since the storm began, Caleb felt the faintest hint of dawn inside himself. The storm had finally drifted east, leaving the Oregon coastline washed clean beneath a pale lavender dawn. Mist clung to the cliffs like a soft veil as emergency vehicles rolled up the muddy road, red and blue lights cutting through the morning fog with sharp, urgent pulses. The hum of engines and the crunch of boots replaced the roar of the night's chaos. Caleb Morgan stood outside his battered cabin, his shoulder tightly bandaged, his gray-green eyes shadowed by exhaustion, but clearer than they had been in years. He watched as state troopers and FBI agents moved with swift purpose, cordoning off the boathouse and searching the cliff's edge. Ranger sat pressed against his leg, the 5-year-old German shepherd trembling slightly from the lingering ache of the brutal kick he had taken the night before, yet sitting upright with his signature alert poise. A tall woman approached from the flashing vehicles, a federal agent in her late 30s with dark auburn hair tied in a low, professional knot. Her posture was athletic, controlled, and her suit remained immaculate despite the mud. Her skin was a warm olive tone, contrasting with her sharp hazel eyes that scanned a scene the way a surgeon might study an open wound. This was Agent Mara Dunn, lead investigator, known for her ruthlessly precise casework and unyielding calm even in the midst of federal storms. Years of dealing with corporate corruption had sculpted her into someone who trusted facts more than people, and who recognized trauma the moment she saw it. She offered Caleb a firm nod. "Mr. Morgan, you've had an eventful night." Caleb exhaled slowly. "You could say that." Emily Clark emerged from the cabin behind him, wrapped in a thick sheriff's jacket 2 sizes too big. Her chestnut hair, finally dry, fell loosely around her shoulders. The bruises along her jaw had begun to fade, but her hazel eyes held a weight far older than her 20-something years. She stood close to Ranger, one hand resting on his back as though grounding herself through the warmth of his fur. Agent Dunn adjusted her gloves and lifted a tablet displaying the video Emily had smuggled across continents. The execution of Daniel Brooks, the deletion of trial data, and footage of emaciated patients abandoned in crude rural clinics. Even the seasoned agent's expression tightened at the images. "It's more damning than we anticipated," Dunn murmured. "Heliodyne Biotech won't escape this. And Sentinel—" She paused, her gaze sharpening. "Will meet consequences they've avoided for far too long." Caleb said nothing. His eyes drifted toward the black SUV parked at the cliffside. Inside, Elliot Kellen sat handcuffed and silent, his pale blue eyes empty of the smug confidence he had worn like a second skin. His wrist was splinted, his right arm hung useless at his side. Gone was the cold, calculated elegance, now replaced by a face hardened into a mask of defeated fury. The field operative captured alongside him looked more stunned than dangerous now. His rigid discipline cracked under federal authority. "They'll talk," Agent Dunn said, almost to herself. "Threatened men always do." Ranger let out a low grumble, as if agreeing. By midday the wind had calmed and the ocean regained its steady, rhythmic pulse. The flashing lights retreated down the hill one by one, leaving only the gentle hush of waves and the faint scent of wet cedar. The chaos had passed, but its echoes remained. Over the next few weeks, as spring drifted into Oregon's early summer, the world shifted quietly. The video went public. Heliodyne executives were indicted. Sentinel Group fractured under federal scrutiny. Daniel Brooks's family, once buried under silence, finally received justice. Emily Clark stayed in the small coastal town, renting a modest room above a bakery that always smelled of warm bread and cinnamon. She spent her mornings writing a multi-part investigative series, her fingers flying across the keys with renewed clarity. Her purpose had been sharpened by fire. The trauma she carried did not vanish, but it found direction. Her articles were praised nationally, not only for exposing corruption, but for humanizing the unseen victims. When she reached the final chapter, one dedicated to Daniel Brooks, she visited his elderly mother in Washington State. Caleb and Ranger accompanied her on the drive, a quiet gesture of solidarity she had not expected but deeply appreciated. Caleb, meanwhile, made a different kind of journey. For the first time in years, he stepped into a therapist's office, a simple room with warm yellow walls, soft lighting, and a gentle-voiced clinician named Dr. Rowan Hayes, a middle-aged man with thin spectacles, salt and pepper beard, and eyes that held neither pity nor judgment. Dr. Hayes's calm, steady demeanor suggested a life spent guiding soldiers and survivors back toward themselves. Caleb sat stiffly on the couch at first, his broad shoulders tense beneath a worn flannel shirt. His scarred face remained unreadable, but Ranger lay beside him, head resting on Caleb's boot, and each time Caleb struggled for breath, the dog pressed closer, anchoring him, reminding him of the present. Healing came in small, stubborn steps. He talked about Helmand, about losing men he had sworn to protect, about nights when silence grew sharp enough to cut, and about how a terrified journalist and a loyal German shepherd had forced him to choose mercy over vengeance. By late summer, the cliffs turned golden under the warm sun. The ocean shimmered like a sheet of hammered copper. The mornings were still cool, but the evenings glowed with tranquil orange light stretching endlessly across the horizon. Caleb walked down the narrow sandy path leading from his cabin to the beach. Ranger trotted eagerly at his side, tail sweeping like a metronome of joy. Emily met them halfway, her notebook tucked under her arm. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that replaced the haunted expression she once wore like armor. The beach was nearly empty. Only the distant call of seabirds and the gentle whisper of waves filled the air. Caleb tossed an old tennis ball. Ranger exploded into motion, paws sending sand flying as he sprinted across the shoreline. He snatched the ball mid-bounce and returned proudly, chest puffed, tail wagging wildly. Caleb laughed, a rare, unrestrained sound that startled even him. Emily joined in, the sound warm enough to melt the last traces of winter lingering inside him. "No storm tonight," she said gently. He nodded. No storm anymore. He looked across the ocean, its vastness no longer a reminder of loneliness, but a space where the world could breathe, where he could breathe. Ranger dropped the ball at his feet and nudged Caleb's leg with infinite trust. Caleb scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling the soft rumble of a contented growl. For the first time in a long time, the man on the cliff was not a shadow hiding from the world. He was simply a man, with a loyal dog, a new purpose, and a future unshackled from the ghosts trailing behind him. And as the sun dipped low, painting the tide in glowing amber, Caleb felt something he had not dared to feel in years: hope. Sometimes in the quiet after a storm, we realize something we were too broken or too tired to see while we were fighting for breath. That not every miracle arrives with angels, and not every blessing comes from the heavens with thunder. Sometimes a miracle has 4 paws and amber eyes. Sometimes it arrives as a stranger who refuses to walk away. And sometimes, more often than we think, it is the quiet hand of God guiding us through the darkness, one trembling step at a time. Caleb thought he had lost his light long ago, buried under war and memory. Emily thought the world no longer listened to those who spoke the truth. Ranger only knew loyalty, and maybe that is why God chose him to be the bridge between 2 wounded souls who needed saving. In life, storms come for all of us, the kind that break homes, the kind that break hearts, and the kind that break our faith in tomorrow. But this story reminds us of something gentle and eternal. When evil rises, when fear tightens its grip, God often sends help in the form we least expect. A dog who refuses to give up, a stranger who chooses mercy, a moment of courage we didn't know we still had. And maybe that is the quiet miracle each of us receives at least once in our lives.